I remember the day I found out about Jessica's divorce as if it were this morning. It hit me with a force I couldn't have anticipated. Like the air suddenly going cold in the middle of summer. The atmosphere shifting before I could even process it. Jessica, my friend of nearly a decade. The one I'd always looked to for her straightforward, pragmatic view of life was suddenly alone. Divorced. Just like that. And the strangest part was, I hadn't seen it coming. I suppose it's true what they say about appearances. How something can look just fine on the outside, while inside, it's quietly falling apart. I had known Jessica's marriage wasn't perfect. No one's is. But in all our conversations over the years, she'd never once hinted at anything like this. There'd been no confessions of nights spent crying alone. No complaints about resentment festering between them. If anything, she was the one who often joked about how marriage was just about keeping each other's company. Even when you're both too tired to care. Yet here we were, all that mundane companionship she'd spoken of was gone, replaced by finality and solitude. She'd ended her marriage and hadn't even asked me for advice or a shoulder to lean on. It felt strange, as if I'd missed something crucial along the way. Had I been so wrapped up in my own life that I'd failed to see her pain? Jessica's divorce quickly became an unsettling new reality for me, one that seemed to sneak into every quiet moment of my day. It left me feeling vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced before. As if cracks in her life might mean something dangerous for mine. It sounds selfish to admit, but her divorce felt like a warning, a chilling reminder of how even the best intentions can unravel, how love can disintegrate with the passing of time if left unchecked. It wasn't a reality I wanted to confront. For the next few days, Jessica's absence loomed like an unwanted guest in my mind. It was almost embarrassing, how much her divorce was affecting me. Every little thing I did seemed to carry an undercurrent of doubt. I'd wake up, turn over in bed, and see my husband's face in the soft morning light. A part of me wanted to reach out, to say something reassuring or tender, as if to fortify our bond against whatever had claimed Jessica's marriage. But I didn't know how to say any of it. How do you tell someone you love them out of fear? The news became an excuse to start probing deeper into my own marriage. Though in ways I hadn't planned or even fully realized, I found myself obsessing over moments in our relationship that I'd long thought were resolved or unimportant. Little disagreements we brushed off over the years now felt like tiny rifts in the foundation. Flaws that suddenly seemed far too obvious to ignore. And once I started noticing them, it was hard to stop. It's amazing, really, how quickly something like this can make you doubt the stability you've built your life on. I had always seen myself as someone who believed in the strength of love, in the quiet resilience of companionship. But Jessica's divorce brought my beliefs into question. It was as if a part of me was waking up to a truth I hadn't wanted to see, that love might not be enough. That it might be possible for two people to live side by side, sharing a life and a bed, while drifting further and further apart. As the days went by, I began feeling like I was standing on thin ice, tiptoeing around my own thoughts, afraid to say out loud what was beginning to gnaw at me. I loved my husband deeply, but did I still see him as I once did? Did we still look at each other with the same sense of excitement, of endless possibility? Or had our relationship become just another habit, a ritual of routines that gave us comfort without passion? These were questions I'd never wanted to ask myself, but once they'd settled in, they were impossible to shake. Jessica's divorce wasn't just a break in her life, it was an echo in mine. A haunting reminder that what had happened to her could happen to anyone. To me, to us. In those quiet moments before sleep, when the house was silent and my thoughts ran wild, I started to feel a creeping sense of dread. The idea that perhaps love wasn't the shield I'd always thought it was, that it could fray and weaken under the weight of time and circumstance, just as easily as it had for Jessica. I wanted to shake the thought, to go back to the simplicity of believing in love without question. But it wasn't that easy. Once doubt finds its way into your heart, it's hard to push it back out. After Jessica's news, my days filled with new, unpredictable anxieties. Supporting her felt like a moral duty, but it also stirred up unexpected fears within me. I was always there for her calls, listening as she detailed the pain, the bitterness, and the unraveling of what she had believed would be a lifelong partnership. It was heartbreaking, seeing her so lost, so angry, but it was also terrifying to witness the slow dismantling of her faith in love. In many ways, Jessica's story became a strange, silent echo in my own life. Whenever I'd hang up, I felt both relief and dread. relief that her struggles weren't my own yet, and dread that perhaps they were more similar than I wanted to admit. Each conversation added a new layer of doubt, making it harder to keep my thoughts from wandering back to my own marriage. And these weren't idle worries. They started to take a toll on my everyday interactions with my husband. I began seeing our differences through a harsher lens. When he left his coffee mug in the sink or forgot a minor detail I'd mentioned earlier in the week, it grated on me in a way it never had before. I found myself wondering if these little irritations were the seeds of something larger. Something that, given time, could grow into resentment. In my mind, small conflicts became symbolic, as if each annoyance was a sign of some fundamental flaw. It felt like I was no longer just living my life, I was sifting through it, trying to locate weaknesses before they became too big to manage. As Jessica's divorce proceedings went on, I became more distracted and detached at home. My husband noticed. Of course, he was always perceptive that way. "Is everything okay?" he'd ask, his eyes searching my face for answers. I could tell he was trying to reach me, trying to bridge a gap he could sense but not quite understand. I wanted to tell him what was wrong, to share the tangled mess of emotions running through my mind. But how could I explain it without sounding like I was losing faith in us? In the quiet hours of the night, lying beside him, I would often lie awake, questioning everything I thought I knew about love, commitment, and happiness. My own thoughts started to feel like strangers, and my insecurities grew louder in the silence. Jessica's story had carved out a hollow space in my heart, one that echoed with fears I didn't know how to silence. As the months passed, the strain of Jessica's situation continued to influence my own life in ways I couldn't escape. My marriage, once a sanctuary of warmth and security, now felt fragile, vulnerable to cracks that I hadn't noticed before. I started seeing our disagreements as ominous signs, fault lines that could deepen into something irreparable. It wasn't that my husband and I were fighting constantly, but rather that the small, everyday annoyances had taken on a weight they hadn't held before. We'd argue over things that should have been insignificant. A forgotten grocery item, a missed call, a difference of opinion over trivial plans, and each moment felt more charged, each slight more personal. It was as if a dark cloud hovered over our home, casting everything in a shadow of doubt. The more I tried to keep my anxieties to myself, the more isolated I felt. My husband, for all his kindness, couldn't possibly understand the turmoil going on inside me. I was trapped in my own head, analyzing every interaction, dissecting every flaw, as if trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit. It was exhausting. I was exhausted, and the more I struggled, the more my husband seemed to notice. I could see it in his eyes: concern, confusion, a silent plea for me to talk to him. But I was afraid that if I opened up, I'd unleash something that couldn't be taken back, something that would change us forever. During this difficult time, I often found myself retreating into memories of our early days together. Those first years had been filled with passion, laughter, and an unshakable certainty that we were meant for each other. We were so young, so idealistic, believing that love would be enough to carry us through anything. I thought back to our first home, a small apartment with creaky floors and drafty windows. We'd furnished it with mismatched furniture and hand-me-downs. But to us, it was perfect. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that felt like enough. Back then, we didn't worry about the future, we lived in the present, reveling in the simplicity of our shared life. But things had changed over the years. We had both changed. Life had grown more complicated, and our dreams, once so neatly aligned, had started to branch out in different directions. Somewhere along the way, I realized, we had stopped talking about our future in the same way. We still loved each other, of course, but it was a love shaped by routine and familiarity, a love that felt more like habit than passion. I started wondering if that was enough, if it was possible to build a lifetime on the quiet comfort of companionship, or if we were just fooling ourselves, like Jessica had. I was afraid that maybe I was just going through the motions, holding on to something that was already slipping away. As the weeks dragged on, I began to feel increasingly isolated, not only from my husband but from myself. I no longer knew who I was outside of my roles as a wife, a friend, a supporter. I felt like I was losing pieces of myself, fragments of the person I'd once been, and I didn't know how to get them back. Jessica's divorce had forced me to confront parts of myself that I had long ignored. I'd always believed that I was independent, strong, capable of facing life's challenges on my own terms. But now, I wasn't so sure. I felt adrift, disconnected from the life I had built, from the person I thought I was. The isolation was suffocating, and the worst part was that I had no one to blame but myself. My husband, for all his patience and understanding, couldn't help me if I didn't let him in. But I was afraid that if I opened up, I would reveal a part of myself that he might not recognize, that he might not love. It was a moment of clarity, an epiphany born out of desperation, that finally broke through the haze. I realized that if I wanted to save my marriage, I had to confront my own fears, my own insecurities. I had to stop projecting Jessica's experiences onto my own life, stop letting her story dictate my own. That night, I took a long, hard look at myself in the mirror, at the person I had become. I didn't recognize her, and that realization was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to myself and to my marriage. From that point on, I made a conscious effort to rebuild my marriage, to rediscover the love that had once brought us together. It wasn't easy. It took time, patience, and a willingness to be vulnerable in ways I hadn't been before. I learned to appreciate the small moments, the quiet acts of love and kindness that had once seemed insignificant. In time, I began to see my husband with new eyes, to love him not despite his flaws but because of them. We were both imperfect, both flawed, but we were willing to try, to fight for the life we had built together. As I watched Jessica begin to rebuild her own life, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. Her journey had shown me the fragility of love, but it had also shown me its resilience. Love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice, a commitment to stay, to fight, to grow together even when it would be easier to walk away.